Why are men so terrified of women? The ancient Greek poet Hesiod, in his poem Works and Days, tells the story of how Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to man. And it was only man at that stage. When Zeus and his team created human beings, they initially only created men. Hesiod was writing between 750 and 650 BCE. Now, Prometheus had been expressly forbidden from giving fire to men because Zeus thought this might make them a bit uppity. With fire, he thought, they might actually challenge the gods. Gods of all shapes and sizes, it seems, have been afraid that their creation would one day challenge them, and they did everything they could to keep them in their place. Prometheus loved man, and he purposely gave man fire, which I think we can interpret both as the means to develop technology and civilization, and also a kind of fire in the belly. Up to this point, men had been rather placid creatures. Hard to imagine, I know. A later poet, Aeschylus, told the story of Prometheus's punishment in Prometheus Bound in about the 5th century BCE. Prometheus was chained by Zeus to a rock, and Zeus commanded an eagle to peck at his liver every night. It would grow back during the day, and the process would be repeated indefinitely. Hesiod, in his poem, describes Zeus's punishment of man. You remember that I said up to this point there were only men. Well, Zeus's punishment for man was, with the help of his fellow Olympians, to create woman. Yep, you heard that right. They created Pandora, the first woman, as a punishment for man. Zeus commanded Hephaestus to mix earth with water and, quote, to put in it the voice and strength of humankind and fashion a sweet, lovely maiden shape, like to the immortal goddesses in face. He commanded Athena to teach her needlework and weaving. Aphrodite, quote, shed grace upon her head and cruel longing and cares that weary the limbs. Then he charged Hermes to put in her a shameless mind and a deceitful nature. And he called her Pandora, which means all gifts, because all the Olympians had contributed a gift. And this evil thing, this woman, was to be a plague to men who eat bread. So yes, Zeus created woman as a punishment for man. I'm sure we all remember the story of Pandora. She, of course, opened the box, or the jar, that contained all the ills of the world, plagues and illnesses and so on. And by undoing the lid of the jar, she unleashed these into the world. You may also remember that the one thing left in the jar was hope. I've often heard this interpreted as a good thing. Hope remained, right? Well, yeah, but it remained in the jar. It wasn't released into the world. Some would interpret this as at least hope remained, but I read it as all of these terrors were unleashed on the world, but hope remained locked away. So the woman Pandora is created as a punishment for men, and she's blamed for releasing untold evils upon the world. Yep, once again, woman gets the blame. It seems odd to me that women are viewed as having a shameless mind and a deceitful nature. At Zeus's command, Hermes contrived within her lies and crafty words. Because, no one would ever accuse the very male god, Zeus, of having a shameless mind or a deceitful nature, would they? Right? Of course not. A plague to men is this creature, Pandora. Interestingly, among the Olympians, the greatest examples of stability and reason, it seems to me, are found in some of the female deities, such as Athena, for example, who's the embodiment of wisdom, and Hestia, who's the goddess of the hearth and home. These are among the more stable and reasonable of the gods. Both of them chose to remain virgins. It seems that they weren't afflicted with the unbound passions of Zeus. Now, it seems fairly clear to me that men over the ages have punished women for their own, that is, men's, shortcomings. This is true in two senses, I think. First, in the sense that they project upon women all of their own weaknesses, weaknesses that are in fact evident in Zeus, but not in Athena and Hestia. They also punish women for the fact that they, men, are tempted by them, women. It's usual, of course, not to emphasize that it is the man who is tempted, but rather that it's the woman who is the temptress. Women are responsible for stirring up the uncontained passions of men and gods like Zeus. Yes, even when we men do the wrong thing, it's all your fault, women. So, we don't owe all of our misogyny to the Abrahamic tradition. The Greeks made their contribution too. Socrates famously describes his wife Xanthippe as a quarrelsome and temperamental woman, for which we should probably read strong-willed and independent. You have to give Plato his due, though. In the Republic, he argues that women are, in essence, capable of the same virtues and abilities as men. He advocates for their inclusion in the guardian class, that is, in the ruling class, the warrior class of his ideal city, his ideal republic. According to Plato, women possess the same natural capacity for governing and philosophical knowledge as men, although he does acknowledge that women are, on average, physically weaker. Because of their shared potential, women, he argues, should receive the same education and training as men, including physical exercise, military training, and philosophical study. There were, in fact, a few female philosophers, although naturally we don't hear much about them. I might do a little bit of research on that and present a later video on it. It's also worth emphasizing that Plato is describing his notion of the ideal state, not describing any state that actually exists. Unfortunately, in his later works, like so many older men, Plato's views become more conservative. But let's embrace his earlier views before he became a curmudgeon. Man's fear of women runs deep in our history from both the Abrahamic and Greek traditions. I think women make us, men, aware of our own failings and weaknesses. It's true that men tend to be, on average, physically stronger than women. There's no point in denying that. And in prehistorical societies, this surely gave the male of the species a significant advantage. I suspect the power structures favouring men appeared very early, based largely on this physical superiority. However, as society developed, as towns and cities grew, physical superiority became less important. But men didn't want to give up their position of power and control, so what could they do? They had to insist that women were inferior in other ways too. They were emotional, easily led, shameless and deceitful. They were a threat to men and had to be kept in their place. Yet, at the same time, men were afraid of women. For one thing, they brought out in men some of our basest instincts, for which, of course, men could blame women. And one day, these women might just demand equal access to education, training, and, the gods forbid, power.